Hello everyone, it's Ange de Lumière here for our new episode of High Vibe Monday. And today the topic is how to keep high vibe regardless of the circumstances. But before we start on the how, I wanted first to define what is high vibe to me. It might not be the same way you perceive to be high vibe, but for me, being high vibe has a very specific meaning. So let's dig into this first. First, sometimes when you want to define something, you have to say what it's not. So there's two things that for me, high vibing is not. The first thing that it's not, it's smiling when you feel like crying, shouting, kicking, or screaming. That is not being high vibe. Smiling is easy, I can just smile now, but inside I can have like incredible feelings bubbling in me that make me feel totally disconnected from this smile. So for me, high vibe comes from a much deeper place than just smiling and pretending things are okay. High vibe for me is an energy. Now, I'm going to explore a little bit this idea because I think as children, we all knew when people were pretending they were happy and when they were not, because all children can read energy. And I remember it being incredibly confusing for me as a child because I would see someone looking really happy or successful, and inside, when I was with them, I felt bad. And of course, I didn't know that it was them. I was picking on their feelings because they looked and seemed so happy. And I remember numerous instances when my mum would say, don't be silly, or this or that or the other, because what I was looking at didn't fit with how it made me feel. And I think all children are like that. I can see that with my children. I actually had a really interesting conversation with my 7-year-old daughter, I think about 6 months ago, when I said to her, do you sometimes look at people who smile and feel really, appear to be really happy, but actually when you feel their energy, it feels very different. She said, of course, Mummy, all the time. So maybe actually the start of this episode would be for you to ask your children and have this conversation with them to help them understand that there's nothing wrong with them. It's just that we live in a world that ignores energy. And as a consequence, people might appear a certain way and they are a very different way. And when this happens to children, it confuses them a lot because they can't make sense of how people can say words that are totally incongruent with how they feel. So I was just going to start with this because for me, putting a brave front when you're crumbling inside is not being high vibe. It's still, there is some, you don't want to have to share what's going on with every person that you meet, and so that's a way to protect and shield your privacy. I understand that very well, but that's not how you're going to get to the high vibe thing. And I am an incredibly positive thinker myself, and for years and years and years I did that. So I'm not pointing fingers, there's no judgment in it, but it's not going to get you high vibe, and I'm going to talk to you how to do that later in this podcast. The second thing that being high vibe is not is, but that's kind of obvious, but I want to spell it out for you, is complaining, bitching, gossiping, and feeling like the world is against you. This is really low vibe. So this is the opposite of high vibe. So even if you started by not refraining from doing these things, and you might have been trained to do that. I'm sorry to say that my mum used to complain a lot. She used to bitch and gossip about everyone. And her basic belief about the world is that it was out to get her. And she had been trained by her own mother. Again, there's no judgment. It's just something that people do. My grandmother had an extremely difficult life, and so I'm not surprised that she came to the point of thinking that the world was against her, but she transmitted that to her children, and I decided that this would stop with me. So I've made a big effort to kind of shift and clear and change my mindset around things. So this is something we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So what is high vibe? Now that we've decided this is not placating a fake smile on your face, and it's refraining from that complaining, bitching, gossiping, and feeling like the world is against you is low vibe. To me, the definition of being high vibe is a feeling of unconditional happiness that comes from knowing that the universe has your back. And I need to say this is work in progress, because from where we come from, if you're from the same kind of background as me, where we were taught to feel that the world was full of dangers, that we had to be careful with strangers, that we shouldn't trust other people, and all sorts of things. This is kind of an alien concept, so it will take some work on yourself, on your beliefs, on your mindset to get to the point where you have this unconditional happiness. And also, talking about unconditional happiness, we are also taught to believe that something or someone is going to make us happy, and that comes from the fact that our parents want to make us happy. So if we're not happy, they take it personally as a sign that they haven't done their job. And so there's this whole resistance to dealing with emotions. I remember as a child, feeling sad, feeling angry, were feelings that were not welcome in our house. We had to be happy. And if we weren't, we were constantly reminded how other people were less happy than we were, less fortunate, and we should just count our blessings, which is counterproductive when you're dealing with emotions. Again, we're going to get back to this very shortly. So we have just established already, and I'm sorry for those of you who come halfway through or right now in the podcast, but we've just covered the fact that it's no use pretending. Now here's a couple of tips that I've identified that can help you to be high vibe regardless of the circumstances. And the very first one is to stop labeling things as good or bad. Okay, that's something that we've been trained to do. It's a judgment. So when something happens, it's either good or bad. Now we need to go beyond good or bad. This is my invitation today. And when something challenging happens, I want you to refrain from complaining and getting people attention from it. Okay, so that doesn't mean that you don't get support. Okay, sometimes we have crisis and really difficult things happening to us, and we need the support. But it's different getting the support from one person who can actually help you. Maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's a healer, a mentor, and it's another thing to tell everyone how bad your life is and get mileage from it. And some people actually live from this place of getting attention through how bad things are for them. And that's not actually raising your vibe, it's actually lowering it. So when something challenging happens, it's important to come back and say, first of all, ask yourself, how can I make the most of this situation? And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story when my dad was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And this is actually a happy story, even though he died, so stay with me. He was diagnosed with the brain tumor in 2008, and then in the summer of 2013, he was told to go back home, that everything had been done, that he was all clear, and just enjoy his life, okay? And I had a feeling that this wasn't actually what was happening, and that things were going to get a turn for the worse. But I couldn't say anything to anyone because, well, at first I didn't want to spoil his joy, that's obvious. And I was right. In September, the tumor came back with a vengeance and things started to accelerate. By November, I knew almost like for certain that he only had weeks to live. And I had planned to go and visit him with my children and my husband. So we decided with my husband and children not to visit as a family because my kids had colds and my dad was going into chemotherapy, which a lot of people will know lowers the immune system. So we didn't want to make things worse by bringing little children with colds. So I went on my own, and in the plane I sat down and I thought, how can I make the most of this? How can I transform this experience into something that is going to inspire me, uplift me, and where I can find gold in it? And this was the attitude I had no idea how to react to this situation. I lived thousands of miles away, so I wasn't going to be able to see him on a regular basis, or not as much if I lived close. I had a host of feelings inside of me that were bubbling and everything, but my attitude to it was to come, and I didn't want to label this as good or bad. I was beyond that, and also I didn't complain to anyone about it, and also my question, which is what I just said earlier: how can I make the most of this situation? And in the 3 months that followed, he died on the 6th of March 2014. Every moment of my life was dedicated to that purpose, which was, how can I make the most of this situation? And I need to say, I've written the memoir about this, so if you are interested in reading it, you reach out to me privately. I'm not offering it publicly on Amazon at the moment, but I'm very happy for people who are interested to read it to purchase it from me privately. And these were the most magical moments I spent with my dad in decades, even though he could not speak anymore, and I only saw him every other week for a weekend when I visited Paris where he lived. But this whole attitude thing, you know what we were talking about, I didn't pretend everything was okay. I didn't complain and got mileage out of it. I didn't go into victim mode, and I didn't label the situation. I actually had the feeling deep inside that this was the way he decided to exit and to go back to the Creator. And it was actually, relatively speaking, it was a beautiful way for him, because he lost consciousness gradually. At least his ego did. So he, of course, he had like everyone, the fear and everything. But on the whole, when he passed, he had lost a lot of his consciousness. So it was an almost easy transition. I shouldn't say that, because it was very, very difficult for him, for me, and my family, and my brother and my sister. But on the whole, I think he made the most of it, because he managed to sort of, through the illness that he chose to transition, to appease some of the fears he had of dying. Now, I'm not going to go deep into that, because it's a completely different story. But what I was going to try and share how I dealt with it. And so what I did was to acknowledge the fears and the old beliefs I had about this situation. And interestingly enough, for me, death has always been something I wanted to explore at a deeper level. Maybe it's because I'm a Scorpio, and of course I'm a medium, so I don't believe in death, but this was like the ultimate crunch, the ultimate test. I might believe that there's life after death. I might believe in reincarnation, and I've done for many years, despite the fact that I was raised by my dad, who was a devout Catholic. But how was I going to deal with the situation when it was someone so close to me? So these situations that present in your lives, these challenges, are actually opportunities to clear old stuff. They're opportunities for you to face your fears, to face unhelpful beliefs. So I'm going to tell you about another instance in my life where I had to look at my fears, and I don't know if I cleared them at that time, but I've cleared them since. And this is something we're going to expand on very soon. When I was pregnant with my third child, I was made redundant. So I lost my job, my full-time employment. I was pregnant, so impossible to find another job. And I couldn't find another job in the same position, because I was a French lawyer living in the UK. And I had no intent of going back to France. So this was a huge trigger for me, because I was wondering, I was a single mother then, I was wondering how I was going to feed my children. And so the biggest fear that came up was that I was going to become homeless and wouldn't have the money to feed my children. And it was like an everyday worry. Now, if something happens to you that triggers beliefs of that sort, I want you to use the following questions to process these fears. First, you have to look at them. As I said earlier, there's no use pretending they're not there. It's really important to face reality, because it's the mindset work that is going to get you the furthest on the high vibe journey. And here's the questions I'd like you to ask yourself when you're facing a situation. Like I was facing not having a job and not knowing what to do to earn money to feed my kids, or I was facing the prospect of my dad dying, which was something that is for most people incredibly scary. The first question I'd like you to ask is it true? And to go back to my losing my job and not knowing if I'm going to keep my house, I had a certain amount of savings. Then some benefits kicked in. I retrained. All sorts of things happened. And actually, really interestingly enough, the financial crisis hit, and so the huge mortgage that I had, the interests, it was an interest-only mortgage. So actually, the amount I paid monthly drastically reduced. So in a way, the crisis helped me keep my home, but I couldn't see that when it happened. And I was in this incredible fear mode, which was legitimate as well. I'm not saying it's not legitimate to be afraid when something as big as that happens to you. But you need to ask, am I sure? Am I really sure this is going to happen? And in most cases, what's going to happen is not as bad as you think it is. What's going to happen, you will probably be able to deal with it a lot better. So even if you still feel wobbly, let's continue with the questioning. Do that as you journal. And if you don't know how to journal, I've done an episode on High Vibe Monday. It's the first episode I've made of this podcast where I explain to you the different ways of journaling and the one that I find the most helpful to clear negativity. So please go back to episode 1 and you'll have more meat to around how to journal. The second question I want you to ask is, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure this is what is going to happen? And in honesty, we don't know. We don't know what the future holds unless we're clairvoyant. And actually, for me, that happens quite a lot. But for most people, they don't know. And even if you did, if you work very intuitive, this is another thing I want to add to the discussion, is that it's very hard when you're in crisis to make the difference between your intuition and your fear. And that's a completely different subject that I might explore on this podcast on another occasion, but not for today. The third question I want you to ask is that thought helping you? Was the thinking or fearing that I was going to lose my house helping me in my predicament when I lost my job? No, it made things really, really bad. And of course, it revealed the fact that I didn't think the universe had my back. I can see the universe had my back in retrospect, but I couldn't see it back then. And I suppose my journey ever since, which has been a journey now of how many years? 14 years, has been that universe put me in positions where I had to deepen my faith, deepen and deepen and deepen it, which is in a way how you raise your vibe, is by having more and more faith. But the last question I want you to ask is, does this thought make you a victim or does it empower you? And that's incredibly important. We all think that we don't have the power. We all think that things happen to us. But it's probably not actually exactly how it happens. I actually now believe that losing my job in 2005-06 was the universe helping me to get on course, because I wasn't supposed to stay in that job, but I couldn't leave it because I was tied financially and I couldn't see how to do things differently. So the universe gave me a kick to get me out of that job so that I could embrace my true calling, which I am doing today, as I call myself a spiritual lawyer. But it's taken me that time because I wasn't ready to just leave my job as a lawyer back then. If I had had a mentor back then, I would have liked her to ask me, how can this empower you? Well, losing your job is an opportunity to reinvent yourself, which is exactly what I did. But back then, I didn't have a mentor, and I came from a background where I felt disempowered. I was raised by a mother, as I mentioned earlier, that thought that life was a bitch, and that, you know, the world was out at you, and that you had to be careful and fearful and all sorts of things. So my invitation when things happen to you is not to smile and pretend everything is okay. It's to actually take some time to get a journal out, or even if it's just paper, and explore these 4 questions. Now, the thing that we don't realize as humans is that when we face a crisis, we react quite differently from animals, and we should really inspire ourselves from animals. And let me explain to you how it works. And this has come from me training in clinical hypnotherapy and in emotional freedom technique, which has made me realize that when animals in the wild face a danger, let's say that you're a gazelle and you've been chased by a lion, and you, very lucky, escaped. Well, the gazelle just doesn't continue going as if nothing happened. They shake their bodies. So they shake the trauma and the adrenaline out of their bodies. We don't. We tend to freeze. We tend to, well, some people take it out on other people, and I would say it's probably a bit more of a masculine way to react to things. But for women, or the feminine way to react is to internalize it and to store all that traumatic energy, all that stress into our bodies. We stuff it down. And then we wonder, this is something that I've observed as a healer, you know, when people say that it's inevitable to put on weight as you get older, and especially around the midline, and we get these big tummies and everything. But for me, it's old energy that's been stuffed down. It's got nothing to do with the menopause or with your age or anything else. It's just that you've probably had a lot of challenges in your life, and you've just you had to be strong. You didn't have a choice. You know, maybe you had kids, you had to keep going, and so you stuff it all down, and it stays energetically in your base chakra right at the bottom. So once you have journaled, this is the first step, is to journal, okay? And it could be that you're not facing a crisis, but maybe you've been through so many things in your life that you actually feel stuck. You feel this energy that everything seems such an effort, and you don't know how to get out of it. When you maybe in your business you're promoting yourself, you don't see much results, everything seems an effort, then maybe you need to consider that there's this kind of energy that's been stuck in you that needs clearing. So once you've journaled on it, the way I've suggested, or any other way that you might see fit, my invitation is to try other things to lift you, because you don't want to kind of stay in that energy for too long. Give yourself half an hour at the most. I do it usually at the beginning of the day so that it doesn't impact my whole day. If I do it at night, then I sleep in that energy for the whole night, so that's not good. So that's why I try and do it first thing in the morning. I wake up earlier, and I have this little routine, and I journal if anything crops up. You can even ask your subconscious mind before you go to bed to show you in a dream, or give you the inspiration of what needs to be cleared at the moment and what to work on, so that you can, because this is going to be ongoing work. Everybody goes through challenges, and everybody has things to clear. So once you've done that journaling aspect, and again, go back to my first episode to see how you can do that with an intent that it's actually emptying the energy in you onto the paper, and you're releasing that negative energy. There's a couple of tips of things that you can do to lift yourself out, okay? But you want to clear first and then lift. So what I've identified, and there's probably more, and I would love to hear what you do. So feel free to send me a message, or post a comment under this video. I know this is going to be an audio for the podcast, so you can reach me through my Facebook page, which is called I Can Help You Thrive. Once you've journaled, here's what to lift you out of this funk, so to speak. Listen to some high vibe music. Be careful of the lyrics, okay? And be careful of the style of music that you're listening to. Some musics actually have really low vibes. Move your body, a good boogie, just running around or jumping up and down on a trampoline. That's really good to raise your vibe. Do something creative. It doesn't have to be art, but if you have never done any art, I encourage you to do some without the pressure of what it's going to look like, just for the feeling that it gives you. Creativity always lifts your vibration, always raises your vibration. And I'm really excited that in a couple of episodes in this month, my guest speaker, so to speak, I'm going to have a crazy sacred conversation with, is Aisha Kennedy, who's a creativity and mindfulness coach. So she's probably going to give us a lot of tips around that. Listen to something really like a comedy, a little something really funny. That is so good. Laughter is such a good vibe, such a good tool to raise your vibe. You know, I don't like to laugh at the expense of others, but I think that some forms of laughter are really, really therapeutic and can literally lift you. And that's what I did when my dad was dying. Actually, on the day after, a couple of days after he died, I went to Paris to support my mum and my sister and my brother, and I brought with me a DVD series of a comedy that we used to watch when we were teens together with my brother and sister, and we watched that for hours just to lift our vibe, and it did the work. We managed to laugh. That was actually the mission that my angels gave me. They said they literally asked me to pick up this set of DVD with me, to bring them with me to Paris to do that on the day. And then there's Reiki and healing modalities. So I'm not going to go too much into that, but I would say that Reiki is quite a high energy modality, but of course it depends on the practitioner. So because it goes through the person to you, whatever vibe the person is at, you will only get it as high as they are. That's a bit my caveat. So when you go to a healer, make sure you tune in intuitively, and we can all do that to make sure that their vibe is really high, and because not everybody is who does healing. And generally, as we discussed earlier. So the problem is, and I don't like to focus so much on the problem, is that we have decades of stuffed down energy. And I have to hold up my hand. I went through so many challenges in my life that I had stuffed it down. I had to keep going. I had young children. I was a single mum. I didn't have time to dwell on my problems. And I was a doer anyway. You know, I was a lawyer. My functioning mode was to act and do and make things happen. It wasn't to reflect and unpick energy. And certainly I had no notion of energy other than intuitively until I trained as a healer. So that's the interesting bit. Now there's a couple of modalities that are really helpful, whether you can do them yourself or you can go to a healer. And this is things I do in sessions with clients who come to me, even for business. I do chakra cleanses with a crystal, and if you don't know what the chakra system is, it's like portals of energy that your body uses to feed yourself on a soul level whilst you're on this planet. So you feed yourself with food through your mouth, and the chakras are like mouths that bring in energy. There's tons of chakras on our body. The 7 main ones are the most well known. And they run from the top of your head to the base of your spine. They have the colors of the rainbow, starting with violet at the top and red at the base. And whenever we have a shock, an emotional upheaval, some of these chakras can close down. And this is like a protection mechanism. It's actually quite a good thing. But then people don't know how to open them again. And sometimes they're not spinning the right way. They can be reversed, all sorts of things. And that's a beautiful thing that I do for clients, and that you might find someone that can do that for you as well, a chakra cleanse with maybe a crystal healer. That is a very powerful thing to do. And I can do that remotely because I've actually got a healing doll that I use to work on people. It's the opposite of a voodoo doll. It's one for good. And working remotely is as powerful, if not more, than working in person. I also recommend doing an energy maintenance routine every day, because every day something will happen that might affect your energy. And I'm not going to go into the detail at this point, but I'm probably going to run a workshop to explain to people how to do that. So look out for my page, my announcements. As I said, if you're on the podcast or on YouTube, reach out. I can help you thrive on Facebook. Cord cutting is incredibly important as well. You can be super high vibe, but if someone's hooked into you and is using your energy, and I've had lots of people do that to me in the past, excuse me, then it's going to keep you low vibe. Now let me explain to you a little bit how cords happen. Everybody knows about energy, whether they're aware of it or not. You don't need to understand energy to use energy. Okay, so what happens is people who have low vibe try usually to hook into people who are high vibe to help their vibration, to raise their vibration. And it's almost like someone who doesn't know how to cook, and you're a great cook and you have lots of food, so they just come and have a free meal on your on the house. And of course you have to invite them in to have that free meal, but sometimes they gate crash. So how do I explain that? The most common way people use to hook into your energy and use your energy for their benefit, like having a free meal, is by creating an argument. People who create arguments with you will hook into you, whether it's a complete stranger on the road or whether it's your mum, your partner, or even one of your kids, or a friend or a boss, whatever. That's the way they hook into you. Now, most people don't know how to unhook these people, and these hooks will remain active in you for as long as until you remove them. So you don't have to be in the physical presence of that person for the hook to be active. And let me tell you, it can also survive death. I have had to unhook a client whose dad had died, but he was quite abusive and quite bossy, and I had to unhook him from her, and he had passed 10 years before. So these energy hooks can also survive not only distance, and you might not have even heard from that person in 30 years, but it can also be someone who has died. Not that I want to scare you, but I want you to be aware of this, and you will feel it, because whenever you think of that person, suddenly you'll feel lower. Suddenly your vibration lowers. And that's an energy thing. It's not just the thought that runs through your mind. It's a very real thing. And that's something that I do as a matter of routine with my clients, which helps them in turn to have a high vibe. They have more energy. They don't feel so drained anymore. And then there's the whole subject of having clear energy boundaries, and that's something that I teach as well. You know how people sometimes you have I'm going to say a friend, and whenever you meet them you feel good until you meet them, and then when they leave you feel really, really low, you feel drained, you feel exhausted. Sometimes you might even need a nap. This is a sign. Just take it as a sign. Now, there's also one thing I want to mention here, and again, I don't want to scare you. I'm not into fear mongering, but there's also entities that can attach to you. And entities are not evil. There's just bits of energy that match your vibration at one point, and they feed off you like people would, but they're not incarnated. And this can happen especially if you've been into drugs, alcohol, or if you've been involved in violence in any way. And this can be cleared as well, very easily, in one session, gone. Of course, after that, we need to repair your aura. We need to understand, you need to understand how not to invite them again. And that involves clearing all those negative beliefs, clearing your vibe and raising your vibe, because it's a match. It's like a magnet. The lower your vibe is, the more you're going to attract low vibes, low vibe people, low vibe entities, and all sorts of things. So it's a bit like a vicious circle, but at the same time, it can be a virtuous circle. So when you start clearing all that, you get better and better and better, and then your energy rises and rises and rises. I suppose what I want to say here is that it's your job to raise your vibe. Okay? Don't be like those people, those energy vampires who use you to raise their vibes. It's your job to raise your vibe. And you do that by all the things I've mentioned in this podcast. The journaling, having a positive attitude to life, but not positive as in I put a fake smile on my face, is as actually I know the universe has my back. I know something good's going to come out of it. Even if it's just that I'm going to have to close the door and never see that person again. This is actually good. And last but not least, there's also a lot of lifestyle aspects to high vibing. What do you put in your mouth? How much do you move? Do you watch the news? How often do you do that? Do you have a creative outlet? Do you learn? Are you still a long life learner? Learning is a high vibe activity. It keeps your brain active, but it's also very nourishing. And also, have a little assessment of the people around you. Do the people around you complain a lot? What does it say? Do you want to change that? And I know sometimes it's difficult. I personally had to completely change my set of friends. And I did that quite naturally because I moved abroad. So I had to make brand new friends. And it was actually one of the best things that happened to me, because I realized looking back that my friends were quite negative. They were pulling me down. They were criticizing me a lot. And when I needed them, they weren't there. So not a very high vibe set of friends, not a very helpful set of friends. But for me, because it was my normal, I didn't question it. I didn't think anything of it. So be also willing to release the people in your life that are not actually adding to it. And they might be really upset, and I had actually a friend who I completely blocked from my life, and she sent me the most horrid, I hadn't blocked her back then, but she sent an incredibly awful email on the day my dad died to me. It was just awful. And I was like, how can she do that? Well, then it was a no-brainer. I decided this is it. I had known her all my life. We met in primary school, but it wasn't a good reason for me to continue to be friends with her, because my eyes opened to what was happening. She was really using me, and she was constantly, she wasn't high vibe. And I know that sounds awful to say, like, get rid of the people who are not high vibe. So just ask the universe to send them someone else. Ask the universe to send them maybe inspiration to change. But you are not here to save everyone. You're not here to get people to be high vibe. Or if you do it as your job. Be paid for it. Don't do it as a hobby, and then you are depleted and you go down, down, down. So why is it so important to be high vibe in business? Because let's not forget, this is a business podcast. And it seemed that I've been talking about anything but business. Well, here's the thing. When you're high vibe, everything is so much easier. Everything is so much effortless. So what I want to say really, and this has been my personal experience, if you're low vibe, everything will feel like an uphill battle. If you're high vibe, it's like going down the hill. And that's the difference that it can make in your business. It's the difference between being in the flow or feeling like you have to do everything yourself, and that you can trust no one, and that you have very little results, and that everything is such an effort. So this is my gift today for you. It's like, it might seem like, why do I need to bother with this in my business? This has got nothing to do with business. And I want to say it has everything to do with business in the flow. And I just want to mention at the end of this podcast that I'm running a 5-day experience for only £32 on how to be high vibe on camera, because I think that's one aspect that is really important. To be a magnet when you post on social media or even on your website, you need to have a high vibe photo of you. So if you're interested to learn how to get, and it's selfies in particular, but I'm sure the process could be used if you want to go for a photo shoot and you want to make sure you're high vibe, because believe me, pictures of people carry their energy at the time the picture was taken. So if you're low vibe when you have this beautiful photo shoot made of you, then the likelihood is that this picture is not going to be as vibrant on your website, and it's not going to be as magnetic as you want it to be. Even though it might be pretty, there's going to be almost like an invisibility cloak over it, and that'll be your vibe. Okay? Thank you for listening today. It's been a pleasure recording this episode. I will talk to you again next week, and I'm wishing you a wonderful week. Bye for now.